Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, my fellow Chibits. Today, I'm here to bring all of you, once again, the weekly manga chapter review of Tokyo Ghoul Read, chapter 78. Now, this chapter is out really fucking early. Like, I gotta say, this chapter is severely early. I just got up, I just got myself a cup of coffee, a little bit tired. If I look a little bit tired, forgive me for that, but I'm just gonna say right now, like, holy crap, I did not expect this chapter to be out so early. Now, judging by the time this is most likely uploaded, it could be late in the day, but I'm just gonna say right now, though, it's just amazing how these Tokyo Ghoul chapters have been coming out a lot earlier than they used to. I remember when, like, a couple months back, maybe 4 months ago, these chapters were coming out maybe around, like, a Sunday, sometimes Monday. Nowadays, they come out early Saturday. It wouldn't surprise me if eventually we might get these on a Friday or something. I would not be surprised if that actually happened. But anyways, today I'm here to bring all of you the weekly review, and as always, I want to be doing it like I normally do, diving in from panel by panel, discussing it, and I have already read the chapter, obviously, because of review, and after looking at this entire chapter and, rereading it a couple of times, I could certainly say that this chapter isn't really that complex. There might be some hidden meaning or symbolism here and there, but when it comes to the entirety of this chapter, it's very straightforward and it's very slow-paced, and Ishida gets right to the point when it comes to what this chapter is about. Now, when it comes to the chapter title, I have no idea what that's reference to. I haven't really looked up into that at all much, so I don't understand what the 100p means. It might have something to do with video quality. I mean, hey, look, 480p, 720 and all that, but I mean, regardless of jokes, I have no idea what 100p stands for, so if anyone knows in the comments, and if you want to clarify what that might mean or symbolize, please do so. I'd like to actually see some more meaning to this chapter, but I will say, however, at this time, I have no idea what that chapter title means, so please forgive me if you came to this, video trying to seek an answer to that. I honestly do not have it. So anyways, and the chapter begins with a Mutsuki flashback. As we all know, last week's chapter ended off with Mutsuki having his complete head just removed from his torso, and we all assumed that Mutsuki was dead, Urei was there, and that was about it. That was kind of like, holy shit, Mutsuki just died. And there was many people speculating maybe it could possibly be Torso, maybe, it's someone else. There's a lot of questions and theories that people are just throwing out there in the last week's chapter, but at this time we have no idea exactly who that was. Many are saying it may be Torso, many are saying it's Mutsuki, and Mutsuki is dead, but we still do not get that answer in this chapter. But however, we get a flashback of Mutsuki, which is, I guess, a very good thing that Ishida's doing. He's kind of building up that atmosphere for whatever happened last week when we got to see Urei enter the room, and he thinks that Mutsuki is dead. I feel like Ishida's just trying to build up that atmosphere and suspense for we can kind of wonder who is really dead. So we get a flashback of Mutsuki in the care of CCG, and Mutsuki is currently being questioned. So, the question is, what happened? And then Mutsuki's like, my family was killed by ghouls. And the CCG officer's like, Toru, Mutsuki, speak clearly. What happened to your family? And Mutsuki being questioned all that is like, I don't remember. And you just see Mutsuki very conflicted and grabbing his clothes and just very confused of what is really going on. Because, I mean, hey, if your parents were killed in front of you or completely gone and you don't remember them, most likely you're going to be in, like, a state of stress, like trauma. You're not going to really remember a lot of things if it all happened really quickly and you saw some horrific events. That's probably what's going on with Mutsuki right now. Just very upset, sad, and doesn't really know how to react. And now being questioned by these, guys in suits, CCG, Mutsuki's like, how do I even supposed to react to this? So you can see how there's a lot of worry and a lot of nervousness. You can see some form of, emphasis on shaking. You can see where Mutsuki's hands are shaking because you see the little squiggly lines around his hands. So clearly, she's trying to emphasize the point that Mutsuki's very conflicted at this moment, doesn't even know what to say. So we go to the next page, and actually you see in big words, stop lying, and then Mutsuki wakes up. Now, at first glance, it may make you think that maybe Torso is saying this, but if you go down to the bottom of the page, it doesn't seem like, Torso actually said that. So the main thing here is who said stop lying? Now, it could possibly be Mutsuki inside of his head saying stop lying to himself, saying, for instance, I don't remember, and when the stop lying popped up, maybe Mutsuki was saying, stop lying, you know what really happened? Or maybe the officer said it, or someone someone else said it, or maybe it's one certain line that was said in the past that had a lot of, I guess, importance to Mutsuki when Mutsuki's parents were still around. Something along the lines of stop lying meant a lot. But as we all know, and it's not something that just came out of nowhere, and I've talked about it in the past, and many other Chibits have talked about this also in the comments. As we know, a lot of the QS, they kind of have a lot of similarities to Kaneki. For instance, different parts of Kaneki's character, maybe something to do with maybe a black-haired Kaneki to white-haired Kaneki. I mean, Mutsuki is the type of character that's kind of been emphasized to be, you know, Kuro Kaneki. For instance, the Kaneki with black hair before he got tortured by Jason. That's constantly been what Mutsuki's been applied to be. And we get to see more emphasis on this in this chapter because of the stop lying, and this is what it makes me think of. For instance, as we know, this entire situation is very similar to what happened between Jason and Kaneki and now Mutsuki and Torso. It's not exactly the same, but it's very similar in the regard of torture and someone being put and forced against their will to be in this situation, which is exactly what is going on with Mutsuki. And the stop lying part reminds me a lot of what has currently happened with Kaneki. As we know, Kaneki, since the very beginning, he's been broken. He's been warped, he's twisted, and he always was suicidal, and he didn't really have any reason to live. He didn't want to live anymore. That was one of the main key points of the recent chapters of how he finally found a new path to continue on living. And, you know, Kaneki was constantly always lying to himself about his past, always lying about what he truly remembered, and that's exactly what this reminds me of. When you see stop lying in big bold letters at the top of the page, I'm like, is Mutsuki saying this to himself? Does this mean that when stop lying, does that mean like you know what really happened, you remember what happened in the past, it's just you're lying to yourself? Maybe, that could be, maybe I'm looking too deep into it, that is a possibility, but I'm just throwing it out there since Mutsuki has been emphasized to be very similar to Kaneki from the past, so who knows. Anyways, we move on to the conversation, Torso being just straight up fucking creepy. So we know the timeline of this chapter takes place before Urei storms into the cave and tries to help out Mutsuki. This is the timeline of this chapter. It takes place before last week's chapter. So, most likely this chapter is before the death of, you know, Misa and everybody else that happened in last week's chapter. This right here, we don't know exactly the certain timeline. We don't know how many days or whatever, but we do know it takes place before last week's chapter. Mutsuki, now waking up after that nightmare, realizes where he's at, and I have to admit, I can understand why Mutsuki's probably crying. Probably because if you were in a situation in the past where you're remembering this trauma of whatever happened to you, whatever happened to your parents, and maybe you're lying about it or not, if you remember that in a dream, and then when you wake up and realize the dream is over, that nightmare's over, but then you wake up into a greater nightmare, all you really could probably do is cry. I mean, think about this. If you no longer had your arms or legs, you couldn't really hide your face to hide your tears or anything, and I mean, sometimes people, when they have dreams, they dream to have comfort away from the reality they currently live, or when they wake up from their dreams, they realize, oh, that dream is finally over, I can get back to reality and stop having that nightmare. That's usually how people look at dreams. Sometimes if you're having a nightmare, you're glad to be back in reality because you are no longer having that nightmare. Now, Mutsuki waking up out of this nightmare, it might emphasize something else. Maybe Mutsuki wants to go back to dreaming in that nightmare because it may be a lot better than what he's currently facing in reality at this time. And so why Mutsuki might be, you know, crying is because he can't currently do anything to defend himself. He can't fight back. And, I mean, overall, it's just a bad situation that Mutsuki can't do nothing. So, I feel like Mutsuki rather be dreaming than actually being there, probably awake at this time. So that's probably why he's crying. Just my 2 cents on that entire matter. Anyways, you have it where Mutsuki's like, no, I'm okay. And then, I'm hungry. And then Torso's like, oh, I'll fix something for you. So, Torso's even feeding Mutsuki, having to force feed Mutsuki something, because as you know, Mutsuki can't even eat. He can't even feed himself because no arms, no legs, so it's kind of fucked up. So, dear, do you ever think about the past? This is what Torso gets into, and the main subject of this chapter is about, actually, Torso's past, not Mutsuki. Dear, do you ever think about the past? The past? I can't really remember things. Just keep him talking. At least while he's going on, he won't hit me. Now, this is what this confirms right here. This one point of dialogue, this piece of dialogue on the top of this page, page 4, lets us know that Mutsuki has not lost his sanity. Because if you were constantly having your limbs chopped off, you might lose your sanity eventually to where you can no longer think properly, and you might just go completely crazy. Now, I'm not going to say that probably doesn't happen, because, as we all know, this is before the timeline of the end of last week's chapter. So, there's a lot of room for a possibility of Mutsuki going crazy. But at this time, though, with what is going on after the limbs being chopped off, force-fed, and all sorts of horrific things that's probably happened to Mutsuki, he still has not lost his mind. He's still sane at this time, and still trying to figure out ways to kind of stay away from pain. For instance, continue to make him talk, and he won't hurt me. He won't do anything, bad against me as long as I continue to humor him and have a conversation with him. So Mutsuki right now is just trying to keep him talking, to stay away from Mutsuki, and allow Mutsuki to kind of, at the very least, not be tortured. And after all of this, we dive into Torso's flashback, his backstory, getting some characterization for him. We get to see the father of Torso, and when Torso is very young, like as a teenager, we get to see what type of life Torso lived and what led him to the events of what is currently going on in the series. So as we can see from the characterization of Torso's father, his father was a very greedy and selfish human being. He was a person that really only cared about himself. He looked at his son as an idiot. He probably didn't even really care about him, and if he ended up dying, he wouldn't mourn the loss of his son. And also, to save his own self when, he was probably starving, Torso's father actually ate Torso's mother just for he could continue on living. So it goes to show you how fucked up he is. He would be willing to eat his own family if it meant he can continue on living. So that would mean that maybe it's not entirely off the table. He might have eventually tried to eat Torso or something if he was very, very hungry. So it just goes to show you how fucked up his father was. Just to even eat his mother, that's fucked up. And then also calling his own son, an idiot, how he's like, if he probably would end up dying if, he got caught or whatever, and then he would get them caught, and he's like, he should just offer himself to die and let his father escape if CCG came. Just, it goes to show you that his father's not someone you should really respect in this flashback. You shouldn't respect Torso's father at all, and this goes to show you the mindset of whatever, Torso is probably going through. I mean, if your parents are raising you from a very young age, and as we know, ghouls, when they're being raised, they don't really live among humans. They usually don't. They usually live off in, different hideaways around the world, in the forest. Maybe they stay stuck in their house or whatever. They don't really leave much. Not every ghoul can be Tsukiyama Shu. Not every ghoul is like that. Not every ghoul can have a rich, family that has a lot of power in the human world that can get away with a lot of things. Not many ghouls are like that. Just Tsukiyama Shu is one of the exceptions. And so a lot of ghouls have to live in poverty and can't really do a lot of things that normal human beings can do, even though in a way ghouls are still very similar to humans. They're just like a different subspecies. So with that being said, poor Torso having only his father as like any type of interaction with, it's kind of fucked up, because that would definitely warp your mind. I mean, we do know that Torso, he's been living in a forest in the middle of a tent for a very long time, his entire life. He's never went down to the city. He's never really had any reaction or interaction with any human being at all, so he's constantly been alone. He's even went as far as to have some form of entertainment by going into landfills and stealing books, magazines, and stuff to be able to look at the pretty pictures. And it's very sad, because you could tell he lived a very lonely life. He had no interaction with anyone, and the only person he could interact with was his father that was barely there. But when his father was there, he was very abusive in a way to where he would break you down mentally and maybe even physically. So you would have to feel bad for Torso, because his backstory lets us know that he just wanted comfort. He wanted someone to be with. He wanted people around where he can have some form of happiness. And I mean, if you have a father that's constantly warping your mind in a way that you just don't know how to react around people, it's kind of obvious eventually why you might turn into those weird type of hobbies that Torso currently does in the latest parts of Tokyo Ghoul Re. As he continues on talking, he's just talking to Mutsuki, revealing everything, and he's like, there was one time my father left for over a month, and he didn't return. And he's like, I'm very hungry, and his stomach was growling, and as we know, ghouls can live for about a month or two, and then they need to really eat, or they'll become very savage. And he was getting very hungry, so he went out of his way to leave the tent, leave the forest, and go to town to try to find something to eat. And as you know, what he would need to eat is a human, and since this is probably his first time, it is his first time actually leaving, he doesn't really know how to hunt. He doesn't really know how to defend himself. So he broke his own father's rules. He went in the middle of the town to try to do things, and he eventually meets a girl. This girl is called Minomi Shi. Now, I did my own personal research on her name before I even did this video. I typed her name on Tokyo Ghoul, like, you know, the Google. I typed in Tokyo Ghoul, Minomi, I typed it in, the entirety, and there is no person so far from what I could see that is related to this character at all. So this person is an entirely new branch of characters in the series. Now, if I could be wrong about that, I could be, but I'm just gonna say right now, I did type in the name, I typed in the first and last name, and clearly this is an entirely new character and all that, and family name and all that, so it's nothing entirely similar to any other character we've seen from the series. This isn't someone's long-lost sister or cousin, this is just an entirely new character that was introduced in Torso's past. So Torso meets this girl, and at first glance, after knowing how Torso treats women, we know this might end up very badly, and it's also in a flashback. Now, I was actually very surprised to see how much care he treated Minomi with. Like, he didn't do anything that was violent, he didn't do anything that was unnatural. I mean, the only thing that was unnatural about Torso in this event with the flashback was that he was a boy that's very uneducated, he didn't really know how to read or write, and Minomi, she didn't really look at him as if he was an oddball or make fun of him. She actually went out of her way to help out Torso, teach him over many times that, you know, he came to visit her, and it was a very sweet thing. But then we get to dive in a little bit more to Minomi and how she had her own circumstances with her family. Her family wasn't really that kind as well, very abusive in a way, physically, and so Torso most likely could relate to Minomi because of how their families were. Even though it was a little bit different circumstances, it was still very hard because their parents weren't parents you would really want to have. And I love in this flashback how Torso learned all he knew now in the series, like how he knows how to read and write and do all sorts of things thanks to her. And eventually, after he studies for a very long time, his father finally arrives back to say, "Oh, you're here." And he's like, "That I heard about you went out into town." And he's like, "You're useless. You could have at least gotten us some food." And it's very sad because the father, clearly, he's all for his own gain. He only cares about himself, and his poor son has been doing anything he can to have some form of happiness. You see some of his happiest moments in his life was actually being with this girl, Minomi, and just having fun. Like, he rides a bike, he was learning to ride a bike. She actually teaches him how to ride a bike. You see this on the bottom of the panel. I mean, you see how he's studying, you know, how they're in the field just looking around, probably flower picking and stuff. And then you have it to where they're just looking at the clouds, just spending time. And you see this really romantic, cute relationship building up between these two characters, and it's very, very sweet. And as it continues moving along, you know something bad is going to happen. Something very fucked up is going to happen very soon. And as it does happen, eventually Torso, he brings back Minomi to his place. They sit there, they chill, they relax, and, you know, Torso's having a fun time because his father hasn't been there for a while. His father's constantly on his little trips. He doesn't return, so Torso thinks everything is fine. He can spend time with Minomi in the house, and Minomi's very understanding. She won't say nothing, so he just opens up. He doesn't reveal that he is a ghoul or anything, but he just allows her to see where he lives, and I want to bet since she's rather a smart girl, I think she is a very intelligent girl. I think she is. I don't think she is probably naive when it comes to the fact that maybe Torso is a ghoul. I don't think she's that stupid. I really don't. So I believe she was probably eventually going to open up, and maybe Torso is going to open up to each other. And maybe the relationship might have been something very similar to Nishiki. It's a possibility. Maybe, you know, that relationship could have happened if, you know, what happened after this page didn't happen. So as they rest together, everything seems to be going well. This romantic relationship between these two, a human and a ghoul. Tragedy has to strike. As he walks out, he realizes she's not there. And he sees his father being a disgusting freak, chopping up the girl that Torso brought home into different pieces, cutting her hair, and just preparing to eat her. It's fucked up because after he saw this, he realized he woke up with his father dead. That means that Torso blacked out. He blacked out after this trauma he just saw. He had no idea how to react. Like, he was so conflicted with all these emotions, he blacked out and killed his father and ripped him limb from limb. You could see it on the top panel. And it lets you know that Torso, he really did care for Minomi quite a bit. It wasn't false emotions, he really did care. And I didn't think it was false to begin with, but it just goes to show you how much he did care. And when he blacked out, you could tell this was the first time he ever killed someone. This is the first time he ever hurt anyone. And this is where the series of Torso becoming as warped as he is nowadays in the recent events of TG is because of these events. And seeing probably Minami dismembered like she was, I believe that's why Torso kind of went to dismembering women. I feel like that's why he started doing that. It's because that's all he knew. He remembered what his father did. He probably remembered the smell of how Minami was when she was chopped up. And then, you know, he probably just wanted more, you know, people that reminded him of Minami. That's probably why. Like, it's probably one of his final memories of Minami was being, you know, chopped up. And that was, like, his final time really seeing her. So he wanted to remember her constantly for the rest of his life. He wanted to remember that girl in his mind. So that's probably why his, you know, killings, the way he killed people, was very similar in that regard of how Minami was chopped up. Is because he wanted to constantly remember her and never forget how she was, or probably how she died. One or the other. But it goes to show you the warped personality of Torso, why he became like he was thanks to his father being very fucked up. And the flashback is finally done. It's finally over. And Torso's starting to cry after the flashback's done. He's like, if you could forget the past, Toru, I think it's for the best. And he's pretty much saying, if you can truly forget the past and completely, you know, give it up, I think you would live a better life. And this from Torso, it's very sad and ironic in a way, because one of the main issues that Kaneki's had throughout the entirety of the series is that he has forgotten the past. See, think about it. One of the main key points of Tokyo Ghoul was that Kaneki was constantly hiding the truth. He kept looking away from his past. Even though he knew what the past was and trying to forget it, he didn't forget. And, you know, he eventually had to remember and face that past. He could no longer just give it up and forget it. He had to make sure he can confront it and overcome it. And that's kind of been one of the main points of Tokyo Ghoul. And Torso saying this, if you can forget the past, Toru, I think it's for the best. That's very sad, because that goes against what Kaneki's been trying to do since the very beginning of the series. And as we know, Mutsuki is the type of character that's been emphasized to be like Kaneki, black-haired Kaneki. And we know that it's kind of starting to be implied that Mutsuki knows a lot more about the past than he's letting on. He's trying to forget, or trying to look the other direction, away from it. Kind of similar to how Kaneki was. And I feel like this is very bad for Torso to be saying it to all people, because that would mean that Mutsuki might try to look away from the truth and become something very similar to what Kaneki was. Or maybe this might help, you know, Mutsuki go down a different path and become a certain person similar to what Kaneki currently is. One or the other most likely could happen, but this right here I feel like is very ironic how it's like the opposite of what Tokyo Ghoul's been trying to teach us. Try to remember your past instead of forgetting. Confront it instead of looking away. And Torso wants to look away. Maybe there's a possibility Torso maybe one day might learn to look and confront his past head on instead of trying to look away. Maybe. Anyways, as the entire story is done, we have a little panel on the bottom, which it really hits home, because this is exactly how I feel at the end of this chapter. It really is exactly how I feel. Mutsuki says, I can't believe I'm here sympathizing with the guy that cut off my arms and leg. I must be crazy, but now that I've talked to him, this lets us know that Mutsuki does feel kind of sorry for Torso, even after, despite, like, all what Torso has done to Mutsuki, what, you know, has happened to him, Mutsuki still feels somewhat sorry for what has happened to Torso, which goes to show you how fucked up this is. This doesn't mean that Mutsuki forgives what Torso is currently doing, forgives Torso for cutting off his arms and legs, forgives him for doing horrific acts that just suits Torso's needs. It doesn't mean Mutsuki forgives that, but it lets us know that in some deep part, Mutsuki is still human and still feels bad for others and still feels sorry for what happened to Torso. But this does not mean that we should forget what Torso is currently doing is right and just. We should not forget that. But it is very sad to see the characterization and how Torso lived his life. So this is a very human response from Mutsuki. I really like that. I really like how Ishida dived into this and allowed us to see how Torso was brought up as a child. And then with the final page of the chapter, Torso stands over Mutsuki like a horrific-looking monster. Very long arms and legs, and looks like he's about to do some horrific acts to Mutsuki. And he wants to take Mutsuki away. So, I like how Ishida did this final panel as well, to just kind of show us that despite all the things we saw throughout this chapter to humanize Torso in a way to where we could kind of care for him, Ishida wants to remind us, regardless of someone's actions, that were their own choice. That was his choice to do what he has done. For instance, it was his choice to cut Mutsuki's arms and legs off, put Mutsuki in this situation, do all these horrific things to other women that Torso has tortured in the past. This was Torso's choice. His father is no longer there, forcing him to do what he is doing. Even though he is warped, his mind is warped, he is still not being forced to do that. And so, Ishida, I feel like with this final page, is reminding us, regardless of how sorry we feel, the actions he's currently doing is very wrong, and it's not something we should honestly forgive. So that's about it. That's my 2 cents on this chapter of Tokyo Ghoul Re. This is probably a very short video, but, I mean, it's a very simplistic chapter. It just goes to show us the life story of Torso and how he lived as a child. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. How do you feel about this chapter? I love you all so much. Please be safe. Chibi out.